Okay. So here we are, Cold War era, discussing the Korean War, the first of the three proxy wars we're going to discuss in this chapter, although we know there were four major proxy wars with lots of other little Cold War skirmishes. We will talk about the fourth in Afghanistan in a whole new chapter 19. And before I get into the actual Korean War, I want to take a second to talk about the history of Korea without getting too far back. So we're going to go around the year 1900. We're going to find that Japan annexes Korea, I think, in 1905. And Japan will rule Korea all the way through the end of World War II. Japan loses in World War II. We learned that towards the end of World War II, February 1945, FDR worked with Stalin and said, look, can you guys start working towards getting Japan? Why don't you start taking back the area of Manchuria? And Korea was a peninsula in the area of historic Manchuria. Okay. So Japan loses and the US takes Japan, but Korea had been, was a question mark. The northern half of Korea had been controlled by the Soviets, and the southern half of Korea was controlled by the United States. They were divided by what's called the 38th parallel, and really simply that's just the 38th parallel on the globe. So in 1950, we're going to find that Stalin is now in this moment of wanting to spread communism. China just finished its civil war and turned communist. And Stalin encouraged the northern half of Korea to invade the southern half of Korea in hopes that he could take the entire Korean peninsula and turn it communist. Let's take a look at this map, if we can. And we know that big China is here. Korea is a peninsula. And they're going to try and say that the historic 38th parallel was right here. And you're going to see that the Soviets are encouraging the North to come and take the southern half of the peninsula. Oops. So immediately, using the Truman Doctrine, and Harry Truman says, let's give aid to the South and make sure that the southern part of Korea does not turn communist. He goes to the UN, the newly established UN, he gets approval, and he sends troops into South Korea. And they pretty quickly are able to push the communists back to the 38th parallel. Now this is where the Korean War takes a twist, because at this point, rumor has it that American General MacArthur decides, let's take it all now. Where troops are here, let's take the entire peninsula, let's get close to communist China. And you can see even this little bit of the Soviet Union was touching Korea. It would be a good strategic move, he says. And the United States Army pushes all the way into the very tip, I believe it was around this corner of Korea, stayed communist, and the rest had been turned capitalist. And for a short period of time, MacArthur looked genius. I actually believe he launched an attack along this way through the sea, an amphibious attack. And rumor has it that Truman did not approve of this attack. We don't know. At this point, though, China decides they're going to send in troops to help the North. And the US were not prepared for the Chinese army. They thought they're just dealing with this kind of weak North Korean army. We'll go up there, we'll take this land, and we'll put a border. And the Chinese actually pushed the Americans back, who had not fortified this part of North Korea well, and you get all the way down into this little part of South Korea. So now the Chinese have pushed, I believe, maybe even further down and taken the capital city of Seoul. They took big chunks of South Korea. And now the US has to send in massive reinforcements, which they weren't wanting to do. The US, Truman had hoped, right, this would be a small force of soldiers and the UN forces that could do this. So the US then is going to push. It's going to take time now. This isn't going to be an easy fight. And the US is going to eventually reestablish the line right near the 38th parallel. Maybe not right on the 38th parallel, maybe a smidge up, but very close to it. And really the war comes to a halt, and there's fighting, and neither side is able to advance. And this goes on for 3 years. And finally, after 3 years, they sign a ceasefire. Now, this is a really interesting thing about the Korean War, is that it's not over. No, really. Theoretically, there's only the North and South Koreans are still in a ceasefire. Okay, it's not they never signed a treaty ending this war. So right now, the border between North and South Korea is considered a hot border. Right? They're still they're still at war with each other. They're just on a ceasefire. And every once in a while, there'll be word like maybe we'll end this war. President Trump was really big in his first year. Sorry, clocks. So President Trump in his first year was really big on trying to work with North Korea. He felt like he could work well with the new young president, Kim Jong-un. He had a connection. Dennis Rodman, really great basketball player, but how'd that happen? And he thought, I can handle this. I can maybe have them give up their nuclear weapons, because currently North Korea has been massively isolated. And they're working on a nuclear program. And for the last 20 plus years, the US has refused to negotiate with them until you give up your nuclear program. It's one of the poorest, if not the poorest country in the world. Even China is not helping them, which you would think that they would at this point, but I digress. So, but it didn't work, right? Trump wasn't able to get any grounds. The reason I bring this up is because during this meeting, a lot of commentators were saying, well, maybe at least President Trump can get the Korean War to end, because it's not over. But he either couldn't or didn't. I don't know. Maybe he was more focused on nuclear bombs. I'm not going to try and get into that. History will tell. But this war is not over. It's still a hot border between the two countries. Another really interesting part about this war is that rumor has it, and a lot of these are rumors, that after the Chinese started pushing back against the Americans and were killing Americans, thousands of Americans died in this war, that the General MacArthur said, hey, nuke China, Truman, nuke them. And Truman said no. He said, I am not going to nuke China. Now, China didn't have nuclear bombs, and although Russia did, and Russia was China's ally, they weren't as sophisticated as ours. They probably, military strategists say that maybe if he had, could have nuclear war, and Russia wouldn't have been able to respond well. We could have, but no. Truman said, no, you're fired, MacArthur. And I'm not dropping a nuke on him. So this is kind of the inside baseball, some of the inside baseball stories about this situation. Either which way, it really did reaffirm the Truman Doctrine and the threat of communism spreading, and the fact that the big countries of Russia and China would get involved in attempting to spread communism. This wouldn't just be them encouraging or Comic-Con or like, hey, we'll, help you a little. No, they would fight on the ground and in skies to defend or push communism. So that's one of the interesting parts of this story. Another interesting thing, and I brought this up when I was talking about proxy wars. This is a proxy war. This was a war really between the U.S. China and the Soviet Union fought in Korea, still being fought in Korea. They don't really fight, but every time, once in a while, they'll do like military exercises and threaten each other. And Korea's working on their atomic bomb. We'll get modern in a second. But look, this is a great picture. Look at these, just like regular old Korean people, imagine. And these are American soldiers marching through Korea. And you're just a Korean person. What are these people just doing their work for the day? This is what it means to have a proxy war in your land. Here's another picture I also find really interesting. Here's a Korean girl. I don't know how old she is, but she looks really young to me. Is this her son? Maybe. Is it her brother? I don't know. I mean, I wonder these things, right? But that's just a U.S. tank just rolling in the background. And this is what it means to have a proxy war fought in your land. One last thing. This is a picture of North, South Korea and parts of China at night. I'm not sure how old the picture is, but look, this is South Korea. Pull it up, right? South Korea, over the last 70 years, has prospered. In fact, the Olympics were in Seoul, South Korea, a few decades ago. It's well lit up. It looks like a modern country. If you were to go there, they have a modern economy. They have modern cities. It's Americanized. It's capitalist and democratic and modern. And here's China, and you can see that China has some big cities as well. This is North Korea at night. There's nothing there. It's one of the poorest places in the world. This little speck is the capital city. So they have a few teeny little lights in the capital city, but none in the rest of the country. And that also is the impact of this war, is that the North has been crippled. The North was not always a poor place, but because of this war, and then the North went communist, and communism loses the Cold War, spoiler alert, right? Or else I'd be calling you all comrade, and I don't even know if I could be making this video. The North has suffered greatly in those years. And yes, President Trump tried to make peace with them. He reached his hand out to them and said, give up your nuclear plan and we'll do business with you. Trump was a businessman, right? And Kim Jong-un reached out his hand and said, thanks for the photo op, Trump, but I'm not giving up my nuclear bomb. So when the proxy wars hit, we're going to find that the people of the countries where the proxy war took place suffer. Every time.